Sometimes I think the modern world has tricked us into believing we're the lucky ones. The screens, the pings, the delivery app that brings you ice cream at 2 a.m. It all whispers that you've made it. But tonight, you crouch at the rim of an older light, a ring of coals air, warm with wood smoke and roasted tubers. A child laughs somewhere in the dark. An owl yawns back, impatient for quiet. Before we go further, a small reality check. If this were a real-time jump, you probably won't survive this. Fire starting is not a button, predators don't respect, do not disturb, and your hiking boots will try to unionize with the blisters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the little map our sleepy crew makes. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge closer to the flames, careful not to fling sparks onto your very flammable modern expectations. The fire throws a gentle orange that paints everyone's cheeks with the same warm blush. Sparks lift and stitch themselves into the night like tiny needles sewing constellations. Someone hums a melody without a name because naming isn't the point. Your shoulders unknot. The earth is a good enough chair, and your breath returns to a pace it once knew when calendars hadn't yet bullied the sky. Across the circle, a woman dusts powdered ochre across a hide, and with a few sure lines, sketches an antelope. The smell is iron-rich, like rain that decided to live inside stone. The picture arrives as if it were already stored in the hand that draws it. A soft laugh makes the rounds we're home enough for tonight, is the translation, and a woven basket lands by your knee. The texture is all ridges and patience plants. You can't name braided into something useful, you suddenly understand. A mainstream anchor drifts into the glow-controlled fire is old. Archaeologists keep finding the receipts. Ash lenses, fire-cracked rock. Charcoal stains evidence that people have tended hearths for hundreds of thousands of years, turning risky dark into a council chamber and a kitchen. You hold a stick in the coals until its tip gleams, then trace a tiny comet in the air, a line you get to steer. Warmth here is immediate and democratic. No one scans a QR code to qualify. The food arrives like a sentence with no bad words. Roasted roots sigh when split berries glitter like traffic lights that forgot how to argue. Thin fish fillets lie across a hot stone. With a dusting of herbs, your tongue recognizes faster than your vocabulary. A piece is pressed into your hand before you can perform the ceremony of refusing and then hoping. Sharing isn't a second thought here. It's the first rule. If you have, you give. If you need, you receive. Tomorrow, the roles rotate like stars. No one tallies. Light joke 1 somewhere. Your budgeting app gets dizzy and sits down. You smear a little ash under your eyes because that feels cinematic, and the camp kindly pretends not to see. A quirky tidbit floats in on the smoke people. In many eras rub ash clay or crushed leaves as insect repellent. Some even suggest that fine ochre particles help with sun and bug protection. It's not the world's first sunscreen. Let's not anger dermatologists, but it's a practical layer when the night buzzes. You look slightly heroic, or at least less appetizing to mosquitoes. Light joke 2. Your smartwatch tries to log applied red dust as a workout and gives up. Conversation loosens into stories. When someone recounts a hunt, they don't say I did, but we moved, and even solo memories braid themselves into a communal rope. A small pouch makes the rounds. Inside, a carved bone bird, a bead, a feather, a smooth pebble that looks like an egg if you squint hard enough. Each object invites a short tale where it came from, who laughed when it was found, who is remembered because of it. It's not exactly a game, but it is precisely a bond. The sky is a map without a frame. One elder stirs the air with a stick and names the useful patches. That bright scatter means the tubers fatten. That milky river hints at the path a herd prefers. That stubborn red star nags omen watchers to be cautious crossing the river bend. Knowledge isn't filed here, it's performed. If modern school is a folder on a laptop tonight, is the desktop actual wood with scratches that memorized their own lessons? Historians still argue whether these constellations anchor literal calendars or ceremonial myths first. You don't need to settle it to feel the calendar click in your bones. A child wanders over with honey-sticky fingers and presses a chunk of comb into your palm, solemn as a priest. It tastes like summer that forgot to end. People chuckle you are now part of the swarm. In the smoke, someone tosses a pinch of resin, a time-tested mosquito hack, and the fire exhales a sweet medicinal breath. Windbreaks of brush and stone make the camp feel like a house that simply misplaced its roof. Spears lean within reach, like tall, underemployed walking sticks. You feel safer than you expected to feel, without an address. Light joke 3. Your phone searches for better camp Wi-Fi and locates a starscape with unlimited data. Truth requests a seat by the fire risk is real. A wrong step can turn an ankle into a foe. A scratch can invite fever, but risk changes shape when it's shared. You watch how the group wraps around a problem like a hand around a splinter, gentle, purposeful, many-fingered. Here, happiness isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of company. Facts keep the embers honest. In caves, negative handprints pigment, blown around splayed fingers, still whisper, "I am here," from walls that forgot the word for century. Shell beads sit far from any coast proof that stories and gifts travel the way rivers do, by connection and gravity. Cut marks on bones describe practiced butchery, the small exact art of turning one life into another day of life. Anthropologists still argue whether such evidence paints forager life as reliably easy or just beautifully adaptable, a quilt of feast and hunger stitched to climate, season, and luck. You lean back. The ground is a promise and briefly a mattress. You picture tomorrow's tasks, gathering, mending, ambling, and feel a lightness that has nothing to do with minimalism videos. Possessions here are verbs, not nouns. You carry, you weave, you share. Time obeys the sun, the shade, the belly, the story. No push notifications unless you count the sudden hush that means listen. A hand drum begins soft as breath. The rhythm doesn't demand, it invites. People join with clacks, murmurs, palms, and a low hum that tidies the edges of the night. Scholars still argue whether rituals like this point mainly to the hunt to the stars or to invisible neighbors just beyond the firelight. You let the question float. You press your fingers into warm soil and feel the drums settle into your pulse, a second heartbeat that doesn't ask you to win anything. For a long, quiet minute, you simply sit where happiness once meant less stuff, more sky, and a warmer circle, the kind of wealth that doesn't fit in a pocket, but fits perfectly in your breathing. Dawn slips in like a polite guest, rosy and unhurried, and your first calendar reminder is birdsong. No snooze button, just a chorus that starts soft and then leans into itself until even the shyest warbler admits the day exists. You rub the last ash from your cheeks. Mosquito armor and dramatic makeup in one taste, the faint sweetness of last night's honey on your lip, and watch the camp unfold into movement that looks suspiciously like leisure disguised as necessity. Someone stirs embers for porridge. Someone else wanders to check a snare. A third plucks burrs from a sleeping mat, humming a tune that pretends to be work, but is actually a morning gift. Here, the clock is enormous and overhead. Time doesn't tick. It drifts, pours, and pools. You learn quickly that the camp's schedule isn't an iron rail. It's braided grass, strong, flexible, and happy to be remade. Necessary tasks are real, but they live inside big pockets of nothing in particular. The kind of blankness modern life calls wasted until you enter it and find it stuffed with laughter, gossip, and a dozen small repairs. Your hands busy themselves with a fiber cord. Your mouth joins a story. Your ears take dictation from the wind. You realize with a small embarrassed smile that multitasking was invented long before laptops. Only the multitask here is social, tactile, and restful. Light. Joke 1, your calendar app tries to schedule sunrise 06/02/06/04 and gets a politely worded error from the sky. A mainstream anchor lands with both feet. Ethnographers who lived with foraging peoples in recent centuries, timing activities with stopwatches and careful notebooks, often recorded surprisingly short daily spans of subsistence labor, sometimes a handful of hours, sometimes even less when the season was generous. The rest is what one anthropologist famously called the original, affluent society affluent. Not in stuff, but in time. You can feel it in your shoulders. Tasks blur into conversation. Gathering blurs into strolling, and strolling blurs into noticing that the world is generous more often than it is stingy. You don't need motivational quotes to go collect berries. The bush holds 1,000 of them, tart and persuasive. The sun rises a finger width higher, and the camp fans out unhurried. You follow a pair of gatherers along a sandy path that makes a habit of pretending to be a creek. They narrate as they walk, which tubers taste earthy sweet, which ones fight back with bitterness, which trees hold birds that watch for honey, and how to listen for the particular complaint of bees when a hive is ready to share. The unit of time is not minutes, it's to the next grove until the shade reaches that rock. 2 short songs. The songs are as official as any stamped badge because everyone knows them. They end when the voice does, which shockingly is also when the task does. Light. Joke 2. You consider inventing the Pomodoro technique for yams, but the yams aren't trying to write a novel. On the way back, you pass a smooth-boned tool someone left to sun-dry after careful scraping. The hand that made it belongs to a person who took time, shaped it really the way water shapes stone. You can feel the difference between doing something to be done and doing something to be good. When work isn't sprinting against a clock, it develops taste. You find yourself choosing the better knot rather than the quick knot, the secure basket weave rather than the sloppy one you'd hide at the bottom of a tote bag. Social ease is the default setting. Even silence is a kind of conversation with shade. A quirky timekeeping tidbit sidles up, gleaming with old curiosity. Someone in a different place and long ago moment once notched a slender bone rows of cuts, grouped and grouped again, an object many scholars read as a lunar tally, possibly a handheld calendar that rode around in a pouch long before anyone had paper. Whether that particular bone tracked Moon's math, or just the world's most dedicated scratcher of polite boredom, the idea floats at the edge of your morning. People have always shaped time into patterns they can carry. You think about last night's bead and feather pouch and smile. Pockets, it turns out, are older than pants. Back in camp, mid-morning, slackens to soft. Children play at hunting with sticks that never quite agree to be spears. Elders trade stories that are both entertainment and weather forecast. A ring of words that makes afternoon chores obvious rather than ordered. A pair of cousins test a new glue made from boiled down plant resin. When it strings, they cheer like fans of a very slow sport. The workday is happening, yes, but it feels voluntary, stitched together by attention rather than obligation. The big secret is hiding in plain sight. When work is embedded in community and landscape, it stops asking to be balanced at all. You, of course, still have a watchdog inside, an internal manager that wants bullet points and deliverables. It asks nervously when break becomes waste. The camp answers by offering lunch, which arrives with the same casual choreography you loved by firelight: a bit of roasted root, a strip of fish, a handful of sour sweet berries. You eat chatmend, a small tear in a sling, and notice that your thoughts have lengthened. The future shrinks back to tomorrow where it belongs, and the afternoon blooms like a patient flower. Historians still argue whether this lightness was universal or seasonal, whether stopwatches in good times tricked us into undercounting the panics, whether observer effects polished the hours while no one was looking. The debate is real, and the humility is healthy. Even so, you can feel the weather of a day like this spacious, productive, and kind. By late afternoon, the camp's energy fades to lo-fi. You stroll with someone to a water source because a stroll plus a reason is better than a reason without a stroll. Your step counter, which gave up at dawn, tries to wake itself and is gently escorted back to sleep. Light joke 3 Irish requests a meeting about your refusal to meet with HR. The water's skin reflects a pale sky. You cup it, sip, and watch a swirl of insects choreograph themselves into a living clock, frenzied at sun edge, calm at shadow's touch. The person beside you measures time in plant cycles. Those reeds will seed after the next fat moon, so we'll cut some for mats then. You file the note in a cabinet. Your brain didn't know it had next to the sweet comb that made you honorary bee and ash under the eyes. Very flattering. Evening paces in on long legs. Tasks wind down without fanfare because the big light dimming is signal enough. You return to the fire with small trophies. A handful of seeds. A story about a hawk. A reed flute that needs practice. You lay them in the common pile where objects and minutes both feel communal. The drum arrives again, heartbeat soft. You don't measure the day by output. You measure it by texture. Rough bark, smooth bone, warm laughter. The hush that falls when a tail hooks the circle. Risk persists, snake's thorns, the simple unfairness of bodies, but the camp meets it with time to spare the surplus every person deserves. It's astonishing how much happiness fits into a day when the day fits into a landscape. Before sleep, you try to imagine the same calendar in your apartment sunrise, walks scheduled by shadow length, meetings conducted while weaving a cord, deadlines set by the patience of glue. It feels absurd, and then less absurd, and then strangely possible. The point is not cosplay or escape. It's remembering that human time is elastic, collaborative, and at its best, gentle. Your eyelids lower with the steady ancestral rhythm of a job well done and a job easily left for morning when the birds clock in and your only commute is from mat to sun. The fire breathes, the stars take attendance, and you tuck yourself into a night that treats rest, not as a prize at the end of a race, but as the other half of living. Smoke tilts noonward, and the camp smells like roasted certainty. Word travels faster than feet. A large animal went down at the river bend, and the people who weren't there are just as involved as the people who were. You wander toward the gathering spot, which is not an office or a church, but a shady patch between two obliging trees. Meat arrives on carrying poles and slings, and with it, the rules that make sure tonight's fire feeds more than just bellies. It feeds the relationship. That is the real pantry. You watch the dance of demand sharing. Here, you don't wait for a polite offer. You make the polite ask. A grandmother taps a hunter's forearm lightly, almost an afterthought, and says, essentially, I'm hungry. That's the magic phrase that opens the cupboard. The hunter nods matter of fact and cuts a portion exactly large enough to honor the request and small enough to honor everyone else. You feel your inner accountant reach for a spreadsheet, and the camp gently removes the calculator from your hand. Light. Joke 1, your budgeting app tries to label the transaction charity, and the camp relabels it Tuesday. A mainstream anchor lands right beside the cutting stone. Ethnographers from the Kalahari to East Africa have long described meat distribution customs among foragers, down to who gets which portion and why. Among the Jiu Huanxi, the person whose arrow struck the animal, not necessarily the person who launched it, often owns the right to distribute because arrows are lent across the camp before a hunt. Prestige slides around the circle that way. No single pair of shoulders can hoard it. You watch a slim reed arrow get passed back to its maker, a shy young man who, at this moment, becomes the clerk of generosity. He doesn't strut. He calculates openly, purely, and then hands out portions like a baker giving away the first warm loaf to whoever walked in earliest. Each cut has a story. A foreleg might travel to the household that lent snares last season. Ribs to the grandmother whose slow stories keep small fires burning. A prized fatty morsel becomes an apology for a quarrel that already feels unimportant. Insulting the meat makes the rounds too, the oldest joke with the deepest purpose. People tease the catch made too skinny, not enough to bother chewing. I've seen better feet on a turtle. The hunter laughs because the point isn't accuracy, it's humility. A belly full of pride is a worse threat to the camp than a belly half full of stew. When the teasing stops, the portions remain generous, but the ego has been salted and preserved for later, when it will be tastier as humor. You notice how children orbit the distribution without getting shooed away. A toddler slides into your lap the way a tide slides around a rock, effortless and unsurprised. Someone else's aunt smooths the child's hair. Another cousin takes the baby so you can stand and stir a pot. Camp-wide childcare is not a program, it's gravity. The person nearest is the person who helps. You remember last night's ash under your eyes, part bug armor, part drama, and how the camp kindly didn't laugh. This is that kindness, but practical hands extend minds. Relax, and every parent is one among many, not a lone tree bracing every wind. A quirky tidbit glints half serious, half smile in some groups saying, "Thank you for ordinary food," is considered odd, even rude, as if you're declaring the gift extraordinary instead of expected, like applauding a doorknob for letting you in. The preferred response is to eat, enjoy, and keep the sharing wheels greased without making a speech. Your modern manners itch to give a TED Talk about gratitude. The camp, bless it, prefers a second helping and a funny story. Light joke 2. You compose a heartfelt thank you note in your head. The wind edits it down to "ma'am good." This contract of giving extends beyond meat. A woman you met yesterday asks to borrow your basket. Well, the camp's basket, the one you've been babysitting? And of course you say yes. Objects are verbs here, and borrowing is how verbs get conjugated. Later, she returns it with a twist of honeycomb tucked inside, nothing formal, just a sweet punctuation mark. You think back to the bead and feather pouch, the little testimonies traveling hand to hand, and realize the camp's true currency is reputation braided with reliability. You become rich by being counted on. Distribution continues with a choreography that's easy. Once you see its logic, ensure elders feed, nursing mothers steady the households with recent bad luck, and sprinkle a little bit everywhere else. So no story in camp ends tonight with a period of hunger. The stew pot accepts bones like a ledger recording credits to tomorrow's soup. The air fills with a smell you would bottle if you could, smoky, savory, and threaded with that particular happiness that follows fairness. Historians still argue whether this egalitarian balance held firm across all times and places, or whether quieter power age ritual knowledge, sly charisma, tilted the table more often than we see. The debate hums in the background like a second fire. You don't need to settle it to taste the design. Someone mentions Hexero in passing long-distance delayed exchange that keeps relationships fresh over months and years. A bead gifted now becomes a visit later. A cloak traded later becomes safe passage in a drought. The network spreads farther than the horizon, which means the camp is bigger than the bodies you can currently see. Your brain, trained by loyalty, points, and limited time offers, wants to calculate ROI. The camp calculates by weather and kinship instead. Light joke 3, you ask where to swipe your card. An elder hands you a reed flute and says, "Play." Gift taboos have their own thorns and flowers. You learn that certain objects are too charged to pass casually. Maybe a pendant carved during mourning, maybe a charm coaxed from a dream. And if given, they must be given with a small ceremony so nobody thinks you're sneaking power around like contraband. On the flip side, some groups keep a standing joke ritual. I take your fine thing because it burdens you. Now you are free. Everyone laughs, and the thing circulates until it grows a history fat enough to feed an evening's worth of tales. A fringe-seeming tidbit peeks out here in a few places. People once adopted the custom of nicknaming gifts so they could be tracked by story as they wandered like celebrity cameos in a camp's long-running sitcom. You help carry a portion to a household at the edge of camp, where a sprained ankle has made work awkward. The path there is lined with gossip and explained by plants. When you arrive, you place the meat beside the hearth stones and sit a while because sitting is part of the delivery. The injured hunter shrugs, grateful but unperformative, and complains about the meat's obvious flaws with theatrical disappointment. The room, which is a circle of shade and laughter, brightens. The meat is good. The mood is safe. As evening slides into its softer voice, you realize how the sharing contract rewires private feelings. Envy gets diapered and rocked to sleep. Pride learns to speak softly and share its snacks. You modern and still learning feel an unclenching you didn't know you needed. A hunger you've carried less for food than for belonging finds a seat and a bowl. The drum from last night returns heartbeat steady, and the pot answers with a bubble. Debate deserves a cushion by the fire too. Historians still argue whether true egalitarianism ever fully held, whether women's voices rode the same current as men's in all seasons, whether a charismatic healer or masterful tracker quietly bent choices more often than song suggests. The picture, like the stew, is mixed. The recipe changes with climate and fortune. But your eyes report a solid truth here today. The mechanisms of fairness are not slogans, they're habits. Asking is normal. Refusing is rare. Boasting gets teased into compost. Reputation grows best in the shade of generosity. By the time bowls go empty, the sharing has layered the camp with something food-like but larger. You wipe your fingers on a twist of grass, lean back, and let the night assemble its starry ledger debits of effort credits, of laughter and the constant surplus of being held in a circle that remembers your name even when your hands are empty. If happiness is a house, this is one of its main beams. Color is your breakfast bell. You push through grass beaded with last night's dew toward a thicket stippled red-blue and sun-warm gold berries, seed heads and flowers that are more map than decoration. Your fingers come away stained like you've been signing guest books on leaves. The camp calls this eating the rainbow, not because anyone's doing a sponsored post for kale, but because the palate is the pantry, sour sweet berries, now oily nuts, next moon roots. When the rains remember their job eggs on certain patient mornings, and if the river is in a good mood, fat that shines like a promise. A staccato chatter overhead turns your face up. There it is, a small bird with a bossy personality and an honest business plan, the honey guide. You've heard the story at the fire, but hearing is not following. You whistle back a copy of a copy, and the bird flicks from tree to tree, nagging you along a crooked corridor of shade. This is an old partnership, your smoke for its sweet tooth, and the bird keeps score more accurately than any app. When the hive appears high and loud, you and two others stack damp brush, coax a smolder and send a ribbon of smoke up like an RSVP. The bees soften. You climb awkwardly, bravely with a modern fear of OSHA, pry free the comb, and retreat with dignity and a few stings you pretend not to feel. The first bites are warm, lightning, floral waxy primal. You drop wax and smashed brood on a flat stone for the bird payment rendered in the coin it loves. Mainstream fact right in your mouth. Peoples from the Hadza to the Yao have long partnered with honey guides. Some even keep a special whistle that means let's go rob bees together. And yes, both sides show up. Your nutrition app, suspicious and provincial, tries to log bee negotiation as cardio and fails. Light joke 1, it suggests yoga hot, which technically your hands agree with. Back at the fire, a pot waits, with patience older than iron. Today's pot isn't even a pot. It's a shallow pit, lined with a skin and filled with water, a couple of women feeding in hot stones with forked sticks until the water trembles. Stone boiling, the archaeologists call it when they find the cracked, heat-shocked rocks, proof that soup existed, even when clay hadn't yet learned to be a bowl. You drop fistfuls of greens and sliced bulbs into the shivering water, steam perfuming the air with the peppery hopefulness of wild onion. Midday drifts you riverward. Fish flash like silver punctuation in a sentence you suddenly know how to read. Traps from woven reeds pinch channels. A spear waits for the shadow that looks like dinner. Farther down, someone patiently teases a line knotted from plant fiber. You wade legs, humming with cold, and watch as a broad-bodied fish is lifted to the shallows, its skin gleaming with the kind of fat your brain recognizes like a long-lost cousin. Mainstream anchor people have worked coasts and rivers for ages. Shell middens and burned bones say so in the quiet language of layers, and those marine-rich meals carry fats that brains and eyes adore. While one group fillets another, does the humble heroism of root work. Digging sticks, pry up tubers that look like knobbly secrets. Some roast whole in ashes until they sigh and split. Others need a grumpy spa day slice soak. Leech patience before bitterness agrees to leave the party. You pinch a piece that went the fast route. It tastes like the color brown in the best possible way, sweet earthy, a little smoky. Your mouth feels fed, not just filled. Light joke 2. Your inner caveman food blogger drafts. Notes of campfire and honest dirt. Would forage again. Quirk arrives on shimmering wings. Termites swarm this week, flying buttery abundant. And a few teenagers practice the ancient sport of mitten catching them above torches, laughing as the insects crisp into rich, nutty snacks. You try one, perhaps braver than handsome, and learn something practical and unglamorous. Happiness sometimes tastes like a perfect crunchy protein you didn't have to chase. The camp treats it like weather brief seasonal shared, which is how almost everything edible behaves. Seasonality isn't a lifestyle, it's physics. You start to see how diet here is really choreography. Food is gathered, not delivered. It's processed in the round stories, braided through tasks that have the courtesy to leave your hands free for nodding and laughing. Salts come from ash tang from fermented odds and ends, tucked in a cool ground niche. Sweetness from that bird-guided theft you will brag about later while pretending not to brag. A cousin smokes fish over a low, steady fire. Smoke winds like a patient ribbon into flesh that will keep for days. You realize how many ways people tame time with flavor drying, smoking, caching, sharing. The pantry is partly memory. Facts wander back into the conversation like elders who never left. Charred seeds buried in hearths tell archaeologists what got roasted. Phytoliths, the tiny glass ghosts plants leave behind, stick to stone tools, whispering of grass seeds, ground into meal long before anyone declared a Neolithic allegiance to farming. Tooth wear patterns on ancient jaws can read like menus, gritty with grit from stone-ground seeds, pitted from a lifetime of nuts, polished by fibers, tugged, chewed, swallowed. None of it is uniform, and that's the point. Historians still argue whether prehistoric diets were reliably meat-centered, plant-rich, or so wildly region-season person-dependent that the only honest headline is variety with a side of it depends. Between bites, debate keeps you honest. Is this abundance you feel typical or a lucky week? Do today's berries hide the memory of last month's hungry wind? Modern foragers, our best living windows, carry the ghost hand of markets and neighbors. Projecting their patterns backward is useful and dangerous at once. You let the questions sit on the log beside you, like guests who may stay late. Their company is part of the meal. Your body, meanwhile, votes with endorphins. The walk to the honey, the wade for fish, the squat and lift of root work. Movement braids through eating until the categories stop being categories. You aren't exercising. You're being a person whose lunch is braided into a riverbank and a song. Light joke 3 somewhere, a treadmill cries into its cup holder. The flavors are richer when earned in minutes and steps, rather than payments and pings. Even the small pains the bee kisses the nettle's opinion feel like punctuation rather than disaster. A fringe glint peeks out of the pot lid. Someone crumbles a little aromatic bark into the soup. A bitter that quiets, aches the way willow once did for many peoples. A hint that medicine cabinets can be forests if you learn the labels. Another person packs marrow into a small smoke-blackened parcel to hang where wind and shade will steady it. into soft tallow-traveling calories for a leaner 2-week window you hope doesn't come but plan for anyway. The plan is not fear. It's hospitality extended to future you. By evening, the table, which is a log, a lap, a friendly patch of ground, fills with a buffet that refuses to call itself a buffet. Fish crisping at the edges, roots sighing into sweetness. A mash of seeds ground on a flat stone and patted into cakes, smoky and tender. Someone's aunt brings out a handful of bright berries saved as a joke dessert. "For the bird," she says, and everyone laughs, then looks up as if the honey guide might have taken a seat. You eat until full becomes calm. It's not a festival. It's Tuesday with good manners. You remember the insult the meat ritual and contribute a theatrical complaint about the fish's clear lack of ambition. People chuckle, satisfied that pride has been floured and fried into humor. Then the drum returns its low thump, blending with the river's longer sentence. Your eyelids soften. Abundance here is not glitz. It's rhythm of seasons of hands of hunger, meeting kindness on a schedule written in moonlight. As the fire edges into hush, you realize one last sweet thing. None of this needed perfection to feel like plenty. It needed cooperation, attention, and the willingness to be led by a bossy little bird to something wild and golden. Tomorrow might be roots in the rain nuts under a colder sun, or a day of lean jokes and longer soup. You don't fear it. The pantry includes people, and tonight they are full. You will walk because walking is what your body expects. The ground is both treadmill and ticket. The path an easy ribbon that redeems itself with every step. Ankles talk to calves, calves to knees, hips to spine, and something unwinds that screens never reach. You amble with a purpose that isn't hurry, it's participation. A sling crosses your chest today. It holds tools and a honey chunk you're pretending is for later, and you settle into the gait. Humans practice better than almost any creature steady. Conversational, a kind of moving truce with distance. Light joke 1, your gym membership peers over the horizon and asks if it still has a job. Heat swells, but you don't. Your skin solves it. Eccrine sweat beads and vanishes. Wind volunteers as a fan. Mainstream anchor humans are unusually good at cooling while moving millions of sweat glands springy. Achilles tendons, a stabilizing nuchal ligament to keep the head from bobbling, and long legs relative to body mass. All features that favor going long over going fast. You feel it in the way your breathing chooses rhythm over drama. How your shoulders drop as if someone quietly removed a backpack you didn't realize you were wearing. The body remembers its original assignment, carry you far gently together. The trail hums with detail. Barefoot or in thin sandals, plated from plant fiber, you step lightly, landing under your center of gravity. The ground teaches, and your feet reply with quiet conversation. Sand squishes, rock insists, leaf litter whispers. Your arch works like a spring. Your toes short for an ape spread and steer. You stop thinking about posture because the landscape does the coaching for free. A low branch cues a duck a thorn patch, prompts a hop a lizard startle, becomes a laugh that ripples forward through the group. You remember the ash you wore under your eyes on the first night, bug armor, dramatic flair, and dab on a smudge because it feels like joining the chorus. Rest is a squat, not a chair. Heels down, hips folded, spine tall. It's the camp's universal pause button. You sink into it while someone reties a tump line, a simple forehead strap that lets a basket ride your skeleton instead of your forearms. Porters the world over know the trick, carry on the frame, not the frown. You experiment with a headload, cautious and gleeful, and discover that posture is a negotiation you can win by listening. A toddler clambers into the crook of your arm, contracts dangling rights to your hip, and promptly falls asleep. The muscles that steady you are small, deep, and devoted. They hum like bees around a calm hive. Movement here is a multi-tool, the same stride that ferries stories. Ferries, calories, water news, and jokes. Speaking of water, a cousin pats a round pale canteen nested in a net bag. An ostrich eggshell filled days ago, stoppered with grass and wax, carried like a fragile moon. Quirky tidbit sturdy truth in dry country people, banked water in those thick stippled shells, sometimes incising them with tiny patterns that turn tools into memory and art. You roll the cool globe in your palm and take a sip that tastes like patience. Someone whistles the honey guide's call for fun. A bossy bird answers because apparently you've built a reputation with the local union. You crest a low ridge. Far off, a dust ghost marks animals moving. Someone gestures and the group edits into a new plan. Not a charge, this is not a scene for trumpets, but a long suggestion aimed at the horizon. Persistence hunting lives more in essays than in movies. But today you try a paragraph. The idea is simple and audacious. Track an animal through the heat, keep it just ahead, and let your superior cooling write the ending. You park your pride and keep your pace. The animal sprints, you don't. The animal stops to shed heat, you don't need to. The day itself joins your side, adding a slow hand on the animal's back while giving you a light push. Mainstream fact threads through the dust. Long patient chases have been documented among Kalahari foragers, and anatomy textbooks quietly cheer sweat glands, long tendons, and big glutes that steady the trunk when you run. Yet historians still argue whether these pursuits were daily bread or rare theater performed only when conditions were perfect. A skill in the kit rather than the whole kitchen. You hold both ideas like you hold the eggshell carefully. Whether the chase ends in a meal or a story you've tasted, the logic endurance is a social technology, and you are one moving part. Hours flatten. You tune to tiny cues, a turned stone, a tuft of grass pressed in the wrong direction, birds scolding a patch of thorns that doesn't belong. Your mind stops fidgeting and starts tracking. The jokes continue quiet, breath efficient, necessary. Insult the feet. Someone grins, and you comply, telling your toes they've underperformed. They respond by catching a pebble and flicking it clean. Light joke 2. Your smartwatch finally records a run and immediately begs for a nap. A vulture wheeling high becomes a data point, not an omen. Shade becomes a currency. You spend wisely. Whether or not the chase culminates tonight, the story will remember it kindly. The after is a masterclass in gentle. You walk back together, sharing sips from that eggshell moon, trading roles without speeches. One sets the pace, one scouts. Shade 1 tells a tale so funny, it invents new energy. The stride is the community. The breath is the glue. Aches that would curdle at a desk melt when the horizon gives your eyes something to graze. Regular, moderate effort keeps you warm without fire, settles your mood without a pep talk, and as anybody quietly knows, helps immune defenses. Patrol more steadily. Nothing magical, just motion's old medicine. Back in camp, the squat returns for craft. You scrape a stick into an arrow shaft, rotate it against a sandstone groove, and watch dust curl like wood's breath. This is gym for the small muscles. The ones modern life outsources to gadgets. Shoulders roll, wrists learn patience, and your back stays honest because the ground tattles when you hunch. Children copy you badly and beautifully, and the lesson isn't marksmanship, it's motion. A grandmother checks your fletching with the same expression she reserves for fish tolerant, then pleased. Even songs are kinetic. Evening drumming asks calves to keep time, hands to speak, shoulders to remember a circle wider than your day. Laughter counts as core work. Story counts as breath training. The fire's heat pairs with the wind's cool, a contrast bath. Mother Nature runs on an infinite budget. Beyond the flames, a path of footprints crosses damp ground. You think of much older ones pressed into Tanzanian ash. Laetoli's famous trail, showing an upright gait and feet with forward-pointing big toes and springy arches long before anyone said jog. The lineage is literally underfoot. Debate curls at the mat's edge like a comfortable cat. Researchers still dispute how often the long chase truly happened whether most meat arrived by ambush trap throw or social exchange, whether daily mileage resembled a gentle postal route or sometimes stretched into a pilgrimage. They also puzzle over injuries and where do sturdy knees and old bones prove smart movement, or do healed breaks and missing teeth underline the tax the body paid. The evidence argues with itself as evidence should. You accept the chorus and choose the rhythm. Walk well, carry kindly, rest deep. Night cools, and you perform the camp's most ancient lift, a sleeping child from lap to mat. The weight is small and infinite. You walk 3 steps as if carrying a world that breathes, and in a way you are. Light joke 3, your form is impeccable. Somewhere, a ghostly personal trainer offers a shimmering thumbs up. You tuck the child under a woven edge and feel a feedback loop lock into place. Carry the people who will later carry you. Walk the paths that will later remember your feet. Before sleep, you stretch the way animals stretch. Yawn long spine, rippling toes, writing signatures in the dust. You aren't chasing a personal best. You're renewing a personal past. The body you live in is not a complaint about chairs. It's a love letter to distance. Tomorrow's errands will be measured in songs again. Your squat will punctuate paragraphs of work, and the horizon will hold open office hours. If happiness has a posture, it might be this upright, unhurried in company, with room for a small dance, when the drum remembers your name. The child you set down last night wakes with a puff of hair and a solemn blink. Small feet cross the mat toward the nearest adult, which for a moment is you, then get handed to an aunt, then to a grandmother, then to a cousin. The relay is the point. Care is a circle, not a contract. Breakfast happens on laps. Jokes happen in handfuls. The only job title here is closest pair of hands. Light joke 1, your inner helicopter parent files a safety complaint. The wind stamps it, denied with a leaf. Mainstream anchor sits in plain view. Humans are cooperative breeders. Alloparents, grandmothers, siblings, friends routinely add food watchfulness and comfort to a child's small economy, and communities woven that way tend to raise more surviving children. Grandmothers are especially potent. Their presence gives mothers time to gather and rest, while quietly boosting grandchildren's odds. You watch it unfold without ceremony. A woman passes a baby to fetch water. A teenager rocks the bundle and retells yesterday's honey victory with the authoritative tone only a 14-year-old can pull off. Childhood isn't a waiting room for life. It's life scaled to small hands. The morning writes its own lesson plan in dirt and sunlight. Toddlers imitate with sacred sloppiness. A rag of hide becomes the sling for a pebble baby. A reed shard becomes the gentlest spear in history. A girl squats beside her grandmother, weaving air with focus so steady, it turns mistakes into muscle memory. 2 boys stalk a grasshopper with theatrical whispering, lose it, then turn the failure into a contest about who can retell the ambush most dramatically. Even disappointment is fuel for play. Evidence doesn't hide, it tracks. Across a gray slick of river clay, you find braided paths of prints, big, medium, very small, curving and doubling back. One trail shows the stagger of a teen carrying a much smaller child setting them down. Now and again, tiny feet appear, vanish, appear. Far away in time, but close in spirit. Old lake beds preserve similar stories. Long walks in wet ground. Big strides paired with little ones. The shape repeats effort wrapped around care, the original commute. Under a limestone overhang, a soft white crust. Moon milk holds finger lines. Short tracks looping scribbles. A few deliberate zigzags, small hands drew these. The elders shrug, of course, children mark the world. Mainstream fact in several painted caves. Finger flutings match children's hand widths and proportions, suggesting that even grand galleries included small artists. The thought warms the rock. You can almost hear giggles echoing behind torchlight, while a grown-up pretends not to notice the doodle on eternity. Quirky tidbit jingles from a pouch. The sound is not coin. It's knuckle bones, animal ankle bones, smoothed by handling ancestors of 1,000 games. An elder spills them on a flat stone. In seconds, a semicircle of kids and 2 impeccably unserious grandparents are playing by rules that require both luck and teasing. You're invited to throw "do so terribly" and receive applause generous enough to count as tutoring. Nearby, a child toots a bone whistle with 3 stubborn notes. It is mostly noise, entirely joy, and exactly the right size for a morning. Teaching isn't a scheduled block, it's an atmosphere. An 8-year-old wears a tiny woven bag of seeds she is absolutely not supposed to spill, which is precisely how she learns not to spill them. A boy is shown how to smooth a dart shaft on sandstone. Short strokes quarter turn, short strokes, and then left to simmer in his own attention while adults gossip and mend. Out among the shrubs, a cousin-led game with solemn rules. No stepping on the shadow, 1 guard, 3 sneaks. Turn stealth into muscle memory and rule-making into social glue. Light joke 2. You reach for a sticker chart, and aunt hands you a lullaby instead. Tenderness here isn't fragile. A scraped knee gets a quick laugh. Ground wins, then a rinse at the water pot, and a smear of crushed leaf that smells like pepper and pine. A fever earns shade sips from an ostrich egg canteen, and a story murmured directly against a small ear. Investment shows up as hours, not coins. A child lopes by in a tunic edged with tiny beads, dozens, then hundreds each, drilled by somebody's patient hand. You think of burials where children were laid to rest beneath cascades of beadwork labor, hours stacking until math turns into tenderness. The message is plain: a long childhood is expected here, and the camp budgets for it in time. School, if you insist on the word, is seasonal and portable. Berry days teach color and restraint. Root days teach tools and patience. Honey days teach whistles and teamwork with bossy birds who demand their cut. At midday, a grandmother sings a sky story. At dusk, the sky repeats it back in stars, a quiz no one dreads. Memory tricks hide in lullabies lists disguised as comfort, and jokes shave the edge off fear better than lectures ever will. Miniatures bring a fringe sparkle. Some archaeologists suspect that small blunt spearheads and tiny arrows in certain layers aren't failures, but training kits or toys safe enough to spare skin, accurate enough to challenge pride. You can see how it would work when a pack of kids turns your reed into a javelin meet that ends in chaos and applause. Historians still argue whether such finds show practice sets symbolic offerings or simply the universal urge to make little versions of big things. Either way, the camp treats imitation as a right, not a nuisance. Discipline when needed is a chorus. A toddler whacks another with a reed. 6 adults say, "Hey," in 6 tones, stern, amused, theatrical, disappointed, musical whisper, serious, until the reed becomes a drawing stick, and the crisis dies of natural causes. Your city brain wants a manual. The camp uses timing, tone, and example. Light joke 3, you attempt to convene a parenting workshop. It morphs into a nap circle. Within 6 minutes, 5 stars would attend again. Not every lesson lands on the first throw. A small explorer tests the fire's border. An ant snaps a warning that cracks like a twig, then folds the same message into a rhyme. The whole ring hums through the afternoon. You file the sequence: swift boundary, quick repair, public repetition. Safety here is culture, not panic. By late day, the children vanish and reappear like swallows, orbiting tasks that make a day make sense. You crouch with a knot of them to peer under a rock with the grave seriousness reserved for bugs. An elder joins, names a few creatures, then lets wonder do most of the teaching. Across the fire, 3 kids insult the meat over a charred root scrap, practicing the camp's humility ritual with exaggerated pouts until everybody is wheezing with laughter. 10 minutes later, they are asleep in a braided heap, owning nothing and belonging to everyone. Debate deserves a log by the fire. Historians still argue Whether prehistoric childhoods were mostly free-range play stitched with light chores, or whether they followed more structured age-graded apprenticeships than we give them credit for. They argue too about those finger fluting's art ritual or doodle. The likeliest answer is a braid play as practice ritual, as game work as belonging. You don't need to solve it to feel the gentleness of a day that lets little hands try and try again. Evening softens. Small bodies lean into larger ones, heavy with honest fatigue. You hand back a shell rattle, accept a tiny flute lesson. You fail cheerfully and sense a wisdom that resists bullet points. Children grow best inside a circle that considers them everyone's business and no one's property. The drum begins heartbeat soft. A toddler rises and falls with your breathing until both of you drift. Tomorrow's curriculum is already waiting in the dust tracks to follow berries, to count jokes, to repeat until they are family. Morning chooses a smaller sky and tells you it's a good day to move. Not far, just beyond the fold of those low hills where the wind drops its shoulders, but far enough that the camp becomes a verb again. You start by emptying your basket of yesterday's pride, a reed flute. You can almost play 2 chords you can definitely trust. And the last wedge of honey you've repeatedly claimed is for later. Objects here are verbs first, then memories. You coil the cords, wrap the flute, and pass the honey to a child who is impressively bad at pretending surprise. Packing is choreography. Mats roll tight, tied with a tug that says, "We'll unroll soon." Slings swallow tools. A tumbling promises your forehead will share the work your hands used to hoard. Clothing is simple skins, woven wraps. Your entire wardrobe just met the definition of capsule, though no one with a mirror would say the word. Light joke 1, you consider asking where to collect your apartment security deposit. The prairie hands you a polite breeze instead. A grandmother smears a line of ochre across a hide bundle. Not decoration, but label. The color tells which household will carry which cash. You swipe a quick stripe under your eyes for the old reasons, bugs and bravado, and the camp allows your little theater. Fire gets packed too in its own way. Coals nest in punky wood wrapped so they smolder rather than sulk. And someone tucks a dry bracket fungus into a pouch, the kind that can nurse an ember for hours if you whisper to it right. Quirky tidbit, useful truth: in many places, people carried fire this way, embers in bark or fungus. So the first task at the next camp was coaxing, not conjuring. You practice the hand drill anyway, spindle, hearth, board, bow, if you're feeling fancy, because skill is the only gear that never breaks. Your palms remember yesterday's chord. The motion asks for rhythm, not speed, and the camp hums the tempo without being asked. The walk is a string of tasks threaded onto leisure. You balance the eggshell canteen again, your favorite pale moon, and trade it mid-trail for a bundle of reeds because your shoulders say so. Children practice being pack animals with loads that weigh more in pride than in fiber. Stories keep pace. The honey guide's scolding gets an encore. The termite feast earns a dramatic retelling. Someone insults the meat of a roasted root you brought for the road until even the root looks flattered. Baskets bounce, beads tick lightly, and laughter edits fatigue into something you can carry. By midday, the new spot introduces itself with shade water close enough to hear, but far enough not to gossip, and a soft floor of leaf litter that promises gentle dreams. You read the ruins the way birds read wind, a faint ring of darker soil, old hearth, a patch of grass with the memory of mat weave pressed into it, a scatter of tiny shell beads someone didn't mean to lose. This is a place the camp knows the way you know the shape of your own palm. Archaeologists would call it a reoccupied site. You call it again, and the word feels like comfort. The build begins where it always does, with wind. You face your shelters so they sip breeze, but don't swallow it backs to prevailing gusts, mouths toward the quiet. 2 people lay a frame of flexible poles. Another lashes ribs with plant cord you twisted yesterday. A 4th weaves brush into walls that look fragile and are not. A low windbreak for sleeping, a deeper lean-to For the hearth, a mat drying rack that doubles as a playground when kids discover it. If the day sharpens, hides will drape the windbreak. If it softens, stars will do the rest. Mainstream anchor steps into the clearing like an old friend, evidence for light. Portable shelters is everywhere if you know how to listen circles of stake holes and floor impressions at lakeside camps. Brush hut ghosts at places like Oholo by the water. Mammoth bone rings on colder plains where people built winter houses from Ice Age leftovers and warmed them with grease-fed lamps. Even the soot inside small limestone lamps from painted caves tells a homely story, fat a wick, and the patient yellow companionship of flame you can put in your pocket. Home has always meant where we can keep a fire and sleep without flinching. Your hands learn the mat. Reeds line up under your thumbs with an obedience that feels earned, not coerced. A child brings you a bundle of fresh-cut stems and offers expert advice which translated means I have been watching all my life. You nestle sleeping places into the lee of the windbreak smooth pockets for hips and shoulders and scatter fresh herbs that make the air smell like clean jokes. A cousin threads shell beads while you work. You think of graves where beads number in the thousands, labor piled into love, and understand how a camp invests in small objects the way a tree invests in rings. Light. Joke 2. Your minimalist influencer phase ends 30 beads in. You're now maximalist about tiny circles. Portable art finds its shelf in a pouch, which is to say, it finds your pocket. A palm-sized figure carved from soft stone. An engraved piece of ochre that's more habit than message. A whistle with 3 faithful notes. A smooth pebble shaped like an egg that makes children solemn for 5 entire seconds. These are not just pretty. They are handles on meaning pieces you can press when a story wants a prop or a day wants a charm. One elder rubs ochre into a bead cord until the whole strand carries a faint rusty glow. Later, when you wear it, dusk will find you sooner in the best way. Work folds into comfort at the edges. A low rack appears over what will be the hearth. You stack green wood nearby for smoke and dry wood for heat. A shallow pit becomes a pot again when lined with skin and fed hot stones. Another depression waits for roasted roots to sigh. Everywhere you look, tasks are small and reversible. If the wind is wrong tomorrow, you can pivot the shelter. If the river gossips too loud at night, you can move upstream. Permanent is for cliffs. Perfect is for songs that change when a new throat joins. You place your mat and feel how happiness likes furniture it can lift. Debate strolls in with the afternoon breeze. Historians still argue whether groups like this moved often residential mobility by season and luck, or whether many settled longer than we suppose when a place layered waterwood and quiet into a generous ledger. The truth likely braids. Some years are restless, some are rooted. You can sense both in the way the camp keeps Cash's hello stone-lined hole behind the big shrub, and in the way everyone ties knots that want to be untied. You don't have to solve it. You only have to feel how not being nailed to a spot can make a person kinder to both spot and self. Light. Joke 3 arrives folded into logistics. You ask about the address to tell friends. An ant taps the sky's 4 corners and says, "We're the ones near the good shade." You write it down with a stick on your palm, which works better than you'd think for the next 15 minutes. Then you memorize the angle of the big leaning tree, the shape of the hill's shoulder, the song the river sings where it pinches between rocks. Maps here are sentences. You are learning to read aloud. Evening tests the build without malice. A breeze noses the windbreak, finds no purchase and moves on. Smoke slants obediently and lifts. A child naps half under a mat and half under a dog that has decided to be a pillow this week. The drum starts a conversation with the new acoustics. The hill replies, the river offers harmony. And you realize how buildings are also instruments if you sit still long enough. Your shoulders lose the last tension from carrying. Your forehead forgives the tump line. The eggshell canteen empty ticks in cooling air like a tired clock that knows it did right by you. Facts blink in the firelight, the way coals do when you breathe on them. Backed bladelets, tiny flakes set into wood or bone to make knives and arrows. Let people carry a whole hardware store in a pouch? Break one, replace it, keep moving. Ostrich eggshell beads traveled far their patterns, hinting at friendships and visiting rites you can wear. The thumb-thick soot smear on your wrist proves that lamps still want to shake hands across time. The world doesn't hoard comforts, it stores them in motion. You settle onto the mat you wove an hour ago and feel a quiet shock of ownership that doesn't clutch. This is your corner of today. Tomorrow it can be someone else's, or folded into a bundle or left to the wind to tidy. Home here is not a fence, it's a relationship with a patch of air, some poles of fire, and a company that knows your laugh. It's lighter than any house you've rented, and somehow heavier with meaning. The stars approve, which is their hobby. Sleep noses forward. You tuck your bead cord under your neck, where it hums a small friendly pressure. A child rolls into your knees, the universal petition for stay. The windbreak sighs. The coal's faithful travelers glow like patient eyes. If happiness needs an address, give it this one near water behind the good breeze. Under a roof, you can carry with people who grin when you arrive and make space when you leave. Dusk arrives on cat feet and rearranges the furniture of the world. The new windbreak hushes the river, lowers its voice, and faces collect around the hearth the way moths collect around promises. Someone crumbles resin into the coals. The smoke sweetens and rises like a ribbon you could tug to call the night closer. You dab a little ash under your eyes. Bug armor and theater your signature now, and feel yourself slide into the hour when errands become meaning. The drum begins, heartbeat soft, and the circle tilts from we did to we are. The first ritual is barely different from dinner. A simple sharing, the renewed contract of you and me and us. You feel the old teasing warm up, someone insults the meat, another compliments the roots, as if they weren't just roots, and the laughter sands pride down to a safe shine. Then the camp switches keys. A hush passes like a heron's shadow. An elder lifts the eggshell canteen, your pale moon, and tips a few drops into the fire, a gift for whatever listens from the quiet. You remember your first sip from that rounded snow, and understand the language gratitude abbreviated, spoken in steam. Stars blink on. Someone touches your sleeve and lines your gaze with a stick's tip. There's the hunter, the belt. 3 bright stitches, there's the little cluster like spilled salt, the 7. You can't help but count. There's the milky river that finds your eyes even on nights when it plays shy. Directions here are older than any map you've downloaded. The sky is the app, and yes, it works offline. Light joke 1, your phone tries to identify a constellation and autocorrects to consternation. Accurate. Stories attached to the lights as if the heavens were a notice board and human memory the thumbtacks. When the Pleiades lift over that low hill, certain tubers fatten. When Orion sinks, rains are done arguing. You don't have to believe in omens to believe in practice. Repetition turns the far into familiar. Mainstream anchor steps gently into the circle. People have been inscribing meaning into darkness for a very long time. In deep caves far from sun-bossed afternoons, hands stenciled themselves in red and black. Bison horses, rhinos, lions galloped across stone. The paint still whispers tens of thousands of years later in places with names you could mouth like prayers. And in a valley across the sea, someone bored holes in bird bone and mammoth ivory until breath turned to music bone flutes, oldest known, able to carry tunes that could nest in nights exactly like this. You hear an echo of that lineage when a cousin coaxes 3 sweet notes from your reed whistle and pretends it's not your new favorite sound. The camp moves. Smoke lamps in little stone bowls with fat wicks are lit and passed like soft stars. One sits in your palm, a pet sunrise. You walk to the low mouth of a limestone throat. The air cools and grows a taste wet stone old air, a memory of soot. Inside the world becomes an editing room. Torchlight licks the walls and the animals wake. A painted horse flexes when flame flickers. A horned bison starts to breathe. A lion's whiskers twitch courtesy of shadow. Quirky tidbit that refuses to be trivial. The best echoes in some caves often live where the biggest paintings live, as if singers and artists agreed on hotspots. A clap can come back as thunder here, and a hum can plump itself into a chorus. You test it hum, and the cave hands your voice back, wearing a velvet coat. The children try not to shriek with delight. They fail honorably. You crouch as the elder points, not at the obvious animals, but at little dots and dashes tucked above a bull's back, at a scatter of marks that could be scratches or a calendar set to maybe. Historians still argue whether those points tally moons, count bison map the Pleiades, or just record the world's earliest "my cousin was here" moments. The debate is a good neighbor. It keeps you from being bossy with the past. What your eyes report is simpler. Many somebodies decided that rock deserved stories thick enough to outlive them. Heat from the lamps turns the cave's breath warm. The drum returns slower than outside, because echoes here breed more easily than rabbits. Eyes half close, painted animals start jogging in place. Someone with a feather mantle. Yes, the one that smells faintly of wax, because honey days leave a trace on everything moves in that side-to-side sliding way you've seen when people step toward trance instead of toward applause. The older people speak of seeing with the inside eye of lights behind the eyelids and ladders that aren't wood. Researchers have argued for decades that the dots, zigzags, and grids buried under the animals are entoptic shapes, patterns. The eye and brain invent under stress flicker or altered states, then pinned to the cave like butterflies from the mind's garden. You don't need the vocabulary to register the lived truth rhythm. Flicker breath image. The recipe makes its own case. A child's hand, small, a little sticky with berry ghost, presses to the wall. Another hand, yours, cups a mouth and blows pigment, a chalky kiss that leaves a negative handprint, "you were here" that might outlast names. Mainstream fact crosses with the moment those stenciled hands aren't idle. They're membership and message, and maybe magic at once, recorded from Spain to Indonesia, with a persistence that makes the idea feel species deep. You think of the finger flutings you saw beneath the limestone overhang days ago, the scribbles that looked like giggles, and how the small in the sacred share space without anyone scheduling it. Light joke 2 peeks in, wanting attention. Your horoscope tonight reads, you will be gently roasted at the fire, possibly steal a second serving of roots, and experience meaningful eye contact with a horse that is also a wall. 5 stars. Would subscribe. Outside, the sky has thickened with stars, a soup so rich you could set a spoon upright in it. Someone outlines a path across them, a songline, you're told, though the word is not this culture's word, linking water holes to hills, to safe passes by way of verses. You walk a few steps and realize your feet are already humming the route. Geography becomes melody. Memory becomes easily carried luggage. Later, following a very terrestrial trail, the sung directions click into place with the ease of a bead slipping onto a chord. You grin at the sky like you've learned a password. Debate wraps a shawl around the circle so everyone can share. Historians still argue whether these nights are primarily about animals and luck, or about repairing the net of relationships after a hard day, or about training memory with rhythm and heat, or about speaking to beings you can neither trap nor trade with. They also argue whether those star-linked stories are precise maps or careful metaphors, or both, depending on who's listening. The camp kindly doesn't wait for footnotes. It moves its body through the story until the story moves back. You catch a fringe glimmer in the corner, a tiny pouch on a thong stuffed with something crumbly and bright. Ochre ground smooth with fat, a pocket sunrise. A woman dots a child's cheeks with it, then presses a line across the child's brow. Protection decoration. Mood, yes. Ochre has walked with people for a shockingly long time. In old rock shelters far from here, engraved pieces and paint kits suggest minds rehearsing symbols earlier than most timelines used to allow. You tap the pouch. Pigment dusts your fingertip in a color you've come to think of as the camp's favorite vowel. Light joke 3 stretches yawns. You attempt a solemn dance step and manage to rotate one ankle around a different calendar. The camp pretends this was intentional and names it the eggshell moon. You bow. The eggshell canteen winks from its nest, still ticking as it cools. The ceremony slides back into errands without a seam. Lamps are pinched out with pinched fingers. A few coals are tucked into the fungus that travels like a sleeping star. The sky's river fades as wisps of clouds slide across it, and the group reads that as bedtime, which is what clouds have been hinting at since clouds began. Before you sleep, a grandmother murmurs a list of edible greens in the tone most people save for love letters, and the night flattered lends you one more breath. You return to the mat you wove and the bead cord that hums a comfortable apology against your neck. The drum keeps a very soft, very slow pulse, the acoustic of your own heart turned outward. Meaning, tonight wasn't an object you hunted. It was a current you stepped into and let carry you past the painted horses, under the spilled salt stars, back to a fire that knows your name. Happiness here never declares itself. It just glows where the hush meets the hum. Sleep gathers itself, the way smoke does, thick where the windbreak cuddles the ground thin, where the river slides a cool finger under the night. Mats settle in a loose crescent around the tamest part of the fire. Heads drift a little closer to Cole's feet, toward the breeze. A geometry learned by backs and ankles long before anyone wrote advice columns. A few lamps blink their small yellow eyes from stone bowls and embers, ride in the bracket fungus pouch, the traveling star that never brags. You tuck your bead cord under your neck, feel its tiny weight like a hand that says, stay and listen to the drum fade until it's only the drum inside your chest. No alarms. The dark is your dimmer switch, and your eyelids obey their oldest boss. Melatonin, your brain's courteous night usher, comes on duty without arguing with bright rectangles, because there are none. Your mattress offers a single setting ground, infinitely firm, with a surprising top layer of fresh herbs that make you smell like sleep. Had a garden. Light. Joke 1, you rate the bed 5 stars for ambience, 3 for softness. Unlimited for stargazing. Children sleep in braids, limb over limb breath braided too. Somewhere at the edge, a dog lifts its head when the wind edits the bush. You don't stir because the dog is your early warning system that never needs charging. Smoke does more than look poetic. A thin veil at ankle height keeps biting things polite. Coals add a narrow moat of warmth that lets feet forgive a long day. Quirky but practical. Before lying down, someone drags a shallow ash line around the sleeping crescent, just a finger's width, a pale ribbon that ants and other tiny evening negotiators prefer not to cross. It's not magic. It's a boundary agreement written in yesterday's fire. You curl onto your side and watch sparks drift up then down, then not at all. Your sleep like the camp's time comes in shapes rather than blocks. You sink fast, then later surface into a midnight shallows. When the air changes key, crickets soften, the river smooths, the temperature dips. That important last bit, mainstream anchor slides into place in diaries and court records. From centuries ago, people often mention a first sleep and second sleep with a quiet watch in between for prayer, whisper talk nursing, or let's call it family diplomacy. That segmented pattern shows up again and again in pre-industrial nights under truly dark skies. But it isn't the only way human sleep behaves. Researchers who camped with foraging communities in recent decades found something different an average night that's not dramatically longer than yours, roughly the length your doctor nags you about, and sleep that tends to begin as the evening cools and end before sunrise, tuned to the day's temperature more than the clock. 2 realities can be true. The species is wide, and night makes many deals. You wake during the middle stillness, not worried, just spacious. The fire wears its red jewelry. Someone across the circle shifts. Another person returns from the dark with careful feet and a relieved sigh. A hand adds a twig to coals. No words, the fire understands. And a soft cough means I'm awake. You can sleep. It is quietly astonishing how the group covers the night like a quilt. People's sleep phases overlap in exactly the messy, reliable way you need, so that almost never is everyone unconscious at once. The dog resettles with a sneeze. Your bead cord hums. You drift again. Dreams come long-legged, well-fed by drum and story. You walk the painted cave and the horses turn their heads. You climb a ladder you know is not wood. You pour 3 drops from the eggshell moon into a hand that is both yours and not. You wake laughing once because your hunting partner is a very bossy honey guide wearing a reed cape and a scowl, and it demands half your breakfast in absolutely perfect human language. Light joke 2. Your sleeping brain invents the world's first contract lawyer bird. You turn the mat size, and the river flips to a quieter page. Moonlight edits the schedule too. On full bell nights, nobody hurries to bed. Conversation wears silver, and lingers, and little jobs that like good light, mending, sorting, carving, borrow an hour. On darker nights, the camp folds sooner. You notice it without assigning meaning beyond the body's old truce with the sky. Historians still argue whether that famous first sleep, second sleep rhythm belonged to nearly everyone in deep time, or mostly to later towns and farmsteads. Anthropologists still argue whether dream lore steered practical choices or traveled mainly as decorative story. The debates are good company. They keep your certainty humble and your curiosity awake just long enough to enjoy the stars. Toward dawn, the air tilts warmer. You rise before the birds make their opening argument because your body has learned the trick of beating the chorus by a breath or two. The nearest ant is already up, pinching the sleeping ember in the fungus until it blushes and agrees to be a flame again. A cordial rustle passes through the crescent coals unhooded. A pot nudged closer mats, folded with the satisfied thump of jobs that know they're done. You stretch the way foxes do everything long at once and grin at the honest stiffness that means you lived yesterday well. Then comes the dream market, as reliable as porridge. People trade fragments like beadwork. Here is a river that ran backward. Here is a cousin appearing with antlers. Here is a child who had a nightfish in their pocket, and the fish whispered directions to a patch of sweet bulbs. Some dreams are pure silliness and win prizes for delivery. Some are listened to more carefully. You dreamed of snakes at the ford. We'll send someone upstream first. You offer your honey guide with the reed cape. The circle gasps theatrically and advises you to bring extra comb today for legal fees. Light joke 3 somewhere. A real honey guide sneezes sues for defamation, then leads you to a hive to settle out of court. Facts pad over and sit by the pot tails tucked. Sleep in camps like this is often distributed: someone tending coals, someone up with a baby, someone responding to the weather's cough, so that the group is rarely, if ever, completely asleep. No committee planned it. The scatter of ages, aches, and chronotypes does it for free. Light exposure, temperature, and chores tug sleep's edges into curves rather than corners. Naps happen when the day allows rather than by sacred appointment. And still the total adds up. Bodies mend. Minds sort. Tomorrow's patience is refilled in the original way by night. Quirky, gentle addendum. A few leaves under your mat smell like small mint and big pine. They're there on purpose. Fragrant plants and sleeping piles don't just make dreams nicer. They also convince tiny nighttime negotiators to negotiate elsewhere. Someone chuckles and pats your bead cord, remembering how beads once followed you to sleep and into the painted cave, and you think of graves where a whole childhood's worth of beads lay down beside a small body, love counted by holes drilled through shells and minutes. Tenderness carries across the dark better than any torch. You drink the day's first mouthful from the eggshell canteen, cool patient yesterday's river made portable, and feel the particular clearness that comes from letting darkness do its oldest job. No alarm stole you from a dream. The birds invited you out of it. No screen argued with your eyelids. The fire negotiated. No mattress scolded your posture. The ground taught it. Historians still argue whether biphasic sleep is the fossil rhythm of all our nights or one braid among many. You take the practical lesson without needing a ruling when light and temperature lead, when risk is shared, and when morning makes room for dream talk. Happiness drifts in like mist and sits down beside the porridge, as quiet as smoke. Morning begins with an argument about nothing, which is to say, about everything that matters when people live this close. Two cousins reach for the same reed knife. One wants to cut cordage, the other to trim fish. Voices lift, then hover, then noticeably refuse to harden. You can feel the camp switch from getting things done to keeping us together, which is not a side quest, but the main game. No gavel falls, no boss strides in. Rules arrive the way wind does felt before named. First comes space. A grandmother gestures one cousin to the shade of the big leaning tree and plants the other by the water jar. Distance is the camp's most reliable counselor. When bodies cool, words do. Then comes story, the camp's preferred court. An elder clears their throat and retells last week's honey heist, giving most of the credit to the bossy bird, a calculated lowering of human pride. Laughter sands the sharp edges down. Light joke one, your inner lawyer reaches for a briefcase. Someone hands you a gourd and says, "Carry this instead." Mainstream anchor takes a seat by the fire in many foraging societies. Leadership is situational, and light hunters lead hunts. Healers lead healings. Grandmothers lead sanity and authority sticks only as long as it's useful. Power doesn't pool. It evaporates and reigns elsewhere. Leveling mechanisms keep would-be bosses humble, teasing, insulting the meat when a hunter swaggers demand-sharing ask and you receive. And if someone tries the tyrant costume, the group's nuclear option walking away. Mobility is a veto with good shoes. You've seen it already in the way camp moves like weather when the place sours. That same motion deflates egos. The cousins' quarrel graduates to theater, which is how a lot of justice functions here. A teenager proposes a mock hunt. Both disputants have to square off in a ridiculous stalking contest, using the reed knife as a trophy that changes hands whenever the audience laughs. Rules without rulers often means rules with an audience. You watch two proud faces practice silly, then skilled, then silly again, until pride loses track of itself. By the end, the knife sits between them on a mat supervised by an ant with the expression of a stone Buddha who's heard better jokes. Far to the north across water and time, ethnographers once recorded Inuit song duels where feuding men traded comic insults and rhythmic boasts before a crowd with laughter and applause, settling what knives would have worsened. The mainstream fact matters because it shows how a fight can be rerouted into art without pretending anger never existed. You hear an echo of that logic tonight. When after fish are roasted, the cousins parody each other's fishing form. Elbows, grimaces, heroic splashes, until even the dog looks amused. The verdict is laughter. The sentence is to share. Quirky tidbit strolls in jangling. In some places, people formalize joking relationships between certain kin categories, special license to tease and be teased that acts like oil in social gears. Your translator ears have caught hints of a similar pact here, a cousin who can say almost anything to another cousin, and both grin as if they've just repaired a hole in the net. It's not chaos, it's maintenance. A harder case appears by late morning. A man took more than his share from yesterday's cash. You feel the circle tighten, not with threat but with focus. Insulting the meat won't do. This is about trust. The camp convenes a slow tribunal disguised as lunch. People speak in spirals, story joke pause a fact. You can test another story. No one shouts thief. The word used is gentler heavy hands. Heavy hands make baskets droop. Heavy hands make friendships creak. The man nods eyes on the mat and waits for the remedy. It arrives as obligation, not punishment tomorrow. He leads an early gathering party and distributes every bit. Pride learns generosity by doing it publicly. Light joke 2, your HR brain whispers, performance improvement plan. The camp whispers practice. Being better will watch. Rules live in tools too. You notice again how the arrow makes the hunter humble. The maker of the arrow owns the right to distribute the meat, even if someone else's throw brought the animal down. Lending arrows before a hunt is a social boomerang. Prestige flies out and returns to many hands. Your inner spreadsheet reluctantly high-fives the custom. The columns add up to less swagger, more soup for all. Sometimes the cure is distance, not dialogue. After a tense exchange with an ant, a young woman stands, announces she will go hear the quiet, and walks with two friends to a grove within shouting distance, but beyond sulking distance. Fission and fusion. The camp's breath solve more than hunger and fuel. People remove themselves before they combust. When they return at dusk with reeds for mats and news of fresh tubers, silence has done its job. The apology is practical extra bundles, dropped by the ant's fire. Facts flicker in like coals breathed on. Among the Juhuansi people, use ridicule, teasing, and sharing to keep would-be big men small. Among the Mbuti communal singing and the Molimo ceremony wake the forest when luck sours, redistributing blame from individuals to the sleeping world and back again as hope. There are no kings here because there are too many jokes and too many exits. Yet historians still argue whether such egalitarian balance was stable across prehistory, whether hidden hierarchies age ritual knowledge, male coalitions tilted choices more than the camp's myth of equality admits. They also argue fiercely about violence. Do skeletal traumas and mass graves from some eras prove endemic warfare? Or do peaceful layers and low homicide modern foragers caution against painting the past in blood? The record is a quilt. Bright patches of conflict, long seams of ordinary cooperation. You add a hand to the daily stitching of trust. After the meal, you walk with the man of the heavy hands to repair a broken snare. He shows you exactly how much twist a fiber wants, exactly how little bait a spring needs, and exactly how long to wait before checking again. Skill is a kind of apology you can hold, and teaching it is a way to rejoin the circle without speeches. On the way back, he insults the snare, a new ritual calling it a lazy snake that naps on duty until everyone laughs, and the snare somehow looks less guilty. A smaller flare-up. Children this time reads, brandished like swords, gets the lightest touch of law. 6 adults chorus a single syllable in 6 tones. The reeds become fishing poles, then drawing sticks. Conflict here is rarely allowed to become a spectacle of winners and losers. It is moved sideways, translated into work throttled with teasing, or walked away from before it grows antlers. Light joke 3, you prepare to hold a mediation. The circle holds a snack instead with excellent results. Evening brings the long court story hour. People recount the cautionary tales of the man who carried his pride like a tumor until the camp removed it with songs, of the woman who hoarded beads and found they turned heavy and cold until she strung them on 3 children and watched them warm, of the hunter who threw too many tantrums and discovered the camp could become very quiet without him. The penalties aren't coded as penalties. They're social weather. If you insist on thunder, you eventually sit alone in the rain. A fringe glimmer catches your eye, a silly stick, not formal, but adopted by custom, a pale, smooth branch anyone can grab to interrupt a monologue or reset a tense talk. Whoever holds it must open with a joke, then a memory, then the smallest complaint phrased as a question. It's law disguised as levity, and it works more often than chance. You try it once timidly and offer the eggshell canteen as Exhibit A for things we all must share wisely. The circle approves, the canteen winks, night folds, coals breathe. You think of the cities you know, the bosses with calendars, the laws with teeth. Rules without rulers isn't rule-less, it's rule full, woven into food distance laughter and feet that can leave. Historians still argue whether such fabrics fray under pressure from droughts arriving neighbors or the gravity of stored food. But your day's evidence is stubborn. Fairness survives best when it's performed daily in small acts, not only announced in large ones. When you finally stretch out on your mat, The river edits its sentence to a lullaby. You've watched a quarrel turn into theater theft, turn into duty and pride, turn into soup. No arrests, no headlines, just a group rehearsing being a group until the muscles of belonging remember the moves. Laws here have no page numbers. They live in joke song space and the quiet power of walking away and walking back. The river is polite today, but nobody trusts a polite river for long. You can smell a far-off thunder that the clouds haven't yet confessed to, and see a smear of grass lying in one direction, the way brush does when water recently remembered its temper. Camp life hums at the usual volume. Matt's fluffed a pot thinking about soup children negotiating property rights over a beetle, but under it runs the low drum beat. You're just starting to hear, keep tomorrow fed, keep danger small, keep plans with backup plans. You begin with caches, the camp's quiet superpower. Yesterday's fish becomes tomorrow's insurance when it's ribboned thin and hung in the smoke, turned into language the air understands. Meat too lean gets a little fat. Love then dries into travel food. Marrow melts into a jar made from a leg bone capped with hide, a portable candle of calories. Roots you roasted soft are mashed and patted into cakes for the rack above the hearth where curious paws don't climb. A shallow pit lined with stone and cool sand swallows a bundle of hard nuts. A clever lid of woven reeds disappears beneath leaf litter that looks like nobody cares. You are now the sort of person who can bury groceries and smile. Light joke 1, your inner app asks to drop a GPS pin. The camp sets a lyric instead. Third line of the water song after the bit about the leaning tree. Mainstream anchor grins through the smoke. Archaeologists keep finding storage pits. Heat-shocked stones from soup, made without pots and middens that prove people planned for the version of themselves who would be hungry later. In dry lands, stashes of fat-rich nuts, think Mungongo in Kalahari stories, are as dependable as a good aunt. In wetter places, racks and fish weirs turn flood moments into pantries. You feel the difference between hoarding and holding? The cache isn't a dragon pile. It's a promise with a map. Fallback foods. The Plan C menu get a cheerful rehearsal because knowing them keeps panic bored. The Marsh is a supermarket that doesn't do signage cattail shoots raw and bright. Tubers that roast into buttered whispers. Seeds that shake into your basket like polite rain. Bitter acorns become friendly after a long bath in running water leached until the tongue stops complaining, then pounded into a mash that holds together on the griddle stone and tastes like the color of comfort. A cousin demonstrates a detox routine for a stubborn root slice. Thin soak in ash water rinse until it smells like nothing, cook until it remembers taste. The chemistry isn't a mystery here, it's a grandmother. Quirky tidbit you love more than you expected on long rivers. Some groups cache baskets of acorns directly in cool streams tied to roots with secret knots, so water does the leaching while time does the thinking. Fire isn't just for food, it's for landscapes. A pair of elders shoulder smoldering brands and stroll the meadow's edge, reading wind with the casual literacy of people who grew up bilingual in breeze. They light a patient creep of flame that eats old grass, then purrs out where green interrupts it. Mainstream, fact old and still bright people in many places have long practiced patch burning. Call it fire stick farming? In one famous case to freshen pasture, coax tender shoots for grazing animals. Clear ticky undergrowth and draw game to a buffet the camp can predict. You squint and see next month's antelope, next week's seeds, tomorrow's easier path. Risk managed by system beats. Risk met by surprise. When weather plays rude, the camp acts like it expected it. Flood drill, a teenager says with glee, because drills are games if you name them right. Sleeping bundles roll tight and get lifted to the high side racks. Children practice the bundle and float hugging, a sealed gourd and kicking gently. Because even if today's river behaves, memory likes muscle more than theory. Slings, swallow knives, and the eggshell canteen your pull moon, and the traveling ember tucks into its fungus bed like a sleepy jewel that always wakes. You feel the last tingle of your city brain, wanting a checklist. The camp hums one without paper, the way a flock turns fluid, accurate, almost rude in how beautiful it looks. Migration here is not a sad word, it's a season. The group works around lowlands, for fish, uplands, for cool sleep the berry ridge when it stains the tongues of birds, the sheltered grove when wind rehearses winter. You've seen the reoccupied sites, old hearth soil a ghost of mat weave, pressed into earth bead crumbs like comet tails. And you grasp the genius home is multiple choice, and each answer is correct for a while. You don't conquer a place, you date it. Historians still argue whether such residential mobility was constant or only common in certain ecologies. Whether some groups grew cozy and stayed longer than our moving pictures admit, whether storage made feet lazier or networks wider. The evidence is a field guide, not a single map. Risk spreads out when people do. You watch a pair of cousins leave with a string of beads and a joke walking to a friendly camp 2 ridges over to trade news obsidian flakes and gossip, which is the same thing as news, but with seasoning. If your river sulks and theirs smiles, you have visiting rights. If your hunt goes lean and their weirs cough, silver bowls appear. You mentioned this before under HX Arrow, but today you see the risk math in action. It's not just generosity, it's insurance denominated in people. Light joke 2. Your modern brain tries to build the universe replies with paid-in laughter. Not all risk is water and weather. Plants have sharp opinions. You learn the emergency substitutes. The cambium you can chew without crying the tart greens that announce themselves in poor soils. The small seeds that agree to be food if you're willing to argue with a grinding stone for an hour. Hands remember, tongues file notes. The worst day on this menu is still a dinner, and the dignity of we can beats the fear of what if. Kids rehearse without knowing they're rehearsing, turning pretend into practice. Sampling bitterness, then spitting and laughing, then trying again after the ashwater trick works. Predators put in a cameo, because of course they do. A track at the river bend says big cat last night, and the camp edits its behavior without drama. Children drift closer to the fire edge when the dim thickens. An elder shifts sleep spots with the dog so the perimeter hums differently. A singer who can sing loud does so while moving for water. The aim isn't to erase risk, it's to make risk speak up so you can answer. Your ash under the eyes look bug armor with flair earns a callback from a grandmother who pats your cheek and says, "Good." You smell like a person the biting things will have to write a letter to. Light joke 3, you award yourself best supporting role in a mosquito's memoir. Facts land like careful stones. In some places, people placed fish weirs of piled rock that work, whether you're watching or not. In others, they cached tubers in cool ground or hung dried meat high between trees. Everywhere they learned the boring brilliance of redundancy. 2 ways to make fire, 3 ways to cross a stream, 4 households who will trade jokes for bread when weather is rude. Tools echo that philosophy-backed bladelets let you repair a knife with a pocket's worth of parts. A sling throws rocks when arrows refuse to show up. A basket does double duty as a sieve and a baby's swing. Debate earns its ember. Researchers still argue whether late Pleistocene climate lurches, cold snaps, drought spells, flood pulses, selected for an especially flexible culture of movement and sharing that felt inside the day like happiness, or whether we're romanticizing hard bargains paid for in thin seasons and quiet grief. They argue whether the so-called broad spectrum turn towards small seeds, fish, and rabbits was a golden diversification or a sign people were hedging because the big game were stingy. They argue whether fire landscapes were mostly for hunting or mostly for gardening before gardens. The arguments matter, they keep us honest. But your skin, nose, and belly offer testimony less dramatic, and more daily being ready is a mood. Calm is what preparation feels like from the inside. Afternoon turns to practice. You and 2 others check a hillside cache. The marker is a joke etched on bark that only your camp finds funny, and it works better than any lock. Inside, dry cakes of tuber flour, a coil of cord, a little jar of rendered fat, smelling like a good memory. 3 shell beads your group once used as a receipt. You refresh the lid, brush away footprints, and leave a new joke on the marker. Tomorrow, you will laugh, which is more secure than any guard dog. Evening delivers the kindness that practice earns porridge with a slick of last month's fat, a strip of fish that survived the day, a heap of greens. Your tongue respects more after watching them go from bitter to sweet. A teen returns from the ridge with weather news. Thunder finally admitted itself. Mats inch a little farther uphill. No speeches. Happiness keeps humming because nothing in it is breakable by one rude night. Sleep comes with its usual contract. We'll rest you. Cole's dog's staggered insomnias keep an ear out. You slide your bead cord to where it will not print your cheek like a necklace of tiny moons, and feel the satisfying weight of a full gourd, a known cache, and a plan if the river is grumpy at dawn. Safety isn't the absence of floods, cats, or hunger. It's the presence of plans, friends, and jokes that still work when the sky clears its throat. The drum agrees patient and low. Tomorrow will be tomorrow. You are ready for it in 3 ways. You set out after breakfast with a pocket full of syllables and a mind shaped like a path. Today's lesson isn't a road, it's a song. An elder taps the silly stick against their palm, formal enough to mean listen, informal enough to mean this will be fun. And the group lifts a tune you've heard murmured at the fire. It starts low, naming the river bend that looks like a sleeping dog. A step later, the melody hops up a third for the place where reeds comb the wind. Your feet memorize the notes before your brain finishes labeling them. Maps here are music that refuses to get lost. You walk by verse. When the melody dips, you dip under a leaning branch. When it holds a long note, you count heartbeats to the big stone that smells like lichen and summer. At the chorus, the trail splits, and the words split to one line for the ridge, another for the marsh, and the group sings the one the day chooses. The youngest kids sing nonsense on top because nonsense is glue. Later, their mouths will learn the meaning without having to bully memory. You've used mnemonics before, righty-tighty, and the alphabet stuck to a tune, but this is the full-sized version navigation folded into art. Light joke 1, your phone tries to Shazam the path and returns. You're standing near a tree, not helpful rectangle. A mainstream anchor joins the walk. All over the world, people have mapped with sound and story. Aboriginal Australian songlines. The dreaming tracks stitch routes to water hills and sacred places into verses that can guide a person across great distances if they sing them right. Across the ocean, navigators once crossed moods of water with no land in sight by hearing the language of swells and stars. Marshallese wayfinders even built stick charts that traced wave patterns around islands like fingerprints of the sea. Different continents, different materials. Same elegant principle: make the world portable by making it sing. Your guide demonstrates a turn step. At a fork, they plant left foot swing, right heel wide, and slap the reed flute against their thigh in a rhythm that says, "Take the shade." Later, you copy the move and laugh at your own choreography. This is a mnemonic dance literal footwork that keeps the fork from forgetting itself. Children exaggerate it because exaggeration is how muscles remember. The old men follow with smaller motions because their feet already know. The trail becomes a low-stakes stage and precision hides inside play. Quirky Tidbit arrives riding a termite mound. On the sunburnt plain beyond the grove, tall gray cathedrals stand in lines like disciplined choir boys. Someone points with 2 fingers respectfully and says these ones lean their long faces near north-south. In some regions, termites build with cosmic tidiness. Their mounds align to the sun's path, turning the ground into a rough compass for anyone who knows the trick. Your modern compass app blinks embarrassed to be redundant. You pocket the trick anyway. Another song for the kit, another arrow you can lend. Teaching turns theatrical when the elder calls for trail myths. Little stories tied to specific trouble spots so brains stop tripping where feet do. At a creek crossing with slick stones, we meet the tale of the foolish eel who bragged about not needing hands. The eel fell 3 times the teller in tones, and the kids chorus 3. so everyone counts their 3 best footholds out loud as they pass. At a bitterberry thicket, a tale explains its calendar. The twins who paint their tongues red and purple only visit after 2 big thunders. Counting storms becomes harvest timing. Light joke 2. You volunteer that in your town, the traffic lights follow a mythical beast called construction. The camp gives you sympathetic berries. At midday, the song pauses, but only to breathe. The map keeps talking in scents and textures. When you smell resin strong, your guide says the path leans left to avoid wasps. When the ground tastes salty, with no water in sight, a grandmother adds, "You are on the old flood's tongue. Go higher." Yes, taste just a fingertip of soil on the teeth to separate clay-heavy flats from sandy tongues. You try it? Your palate graduates from red-white rosé to River Ridge recently rude. Your bead cord bumps your collarbone in agreement as if it, too, is a tiny compass that points toward belonging. Facts put a hand on your shoulder without scolding. Somewhere far from here, a stone in a cave bears lines that some scholars read as one of the oldest land sketches. Ridges and streams engraved as if a traveler scratched the journey into rock to carry home. Other places hold pecked petroglyphs that look suspiciously like map's eye views of fields, paths, and enclosures. Maybe not subway maps as you know them, but the intention rhymes make space visible from the safety of a palm. The distant cousins of these pockets of memory include knotted cords that tallied tribute and possibly place. Memory boards studded with beads that cued a storyteller through a landscape of facts. Different eras, similar hunger keep the world when you put the world down. You walk into a teaching wind. Your guide stops where breezes braid opens their hands and talks about swell language like a gossip of air. The way crosswinds comb grass in overlapping scripts. The way distant thunder writes a paragraph you can hear before the clouds learn grammar. Out on water, people read swells like lines of poetry. One set from the trades, another from a storm, hundreds of miles away. On land, you can do the same with scent and gust. The skill is old and democratic. No telescope required, just attention, paid in affordable installments. The group breaks for a memory meal. Lunch is delicious and sneaky. 5 items arranged in the order you'll meet 5 landmarks on the next leg. Fish River Bend, sour berries. The shady thicket, a pinch of salt. The old flood's tongue, honey the bee tree. And seed cakes, the long grass after. You eat your route and grin at the trickery. Your stomach becomes a pocket map. Children get seconds, which is how you make sure the next generation never forgets the way home. Light joke 3 somewhere, an educational consultant faints at the lack of worksheets. Afternoon gives you a star rehearsal, while the sun still owns the sky. On the ground sticks mark the directions of 3 bright stars you will use after dusk, and kids play a game of who can point with eyes closed. When night finally hums on the elder's arm, sweeps the horizon, and the songline becomes a star line. Low-slung Scorpius as a bent river, a Southern Cross as a notched tree, the Milk River as the big path that keeps you honest. Mainstream fact taps again. Polynesian navigators kept star compasses in their minds. Rising points and setting points mapped like cardinal kin. Feet in canoes, eyes in the sky, the body a measuring tool longer than any ruler. You don't need to cross an ocean to feel the elegance. Even this little hop across the valley becomes ceremonial when sung. Historians still argue whether those old engravings are maps or lucky scratches. Whether songlines carry centimeter-accurate geography or sacred itineraries that trade precision for meaning. Whether knots once charted place or only counted debts and dates. They still argue whether your termite compass trick would tempt people in deep time, or if it's a modern poetic overlay. Good. Let the argument walk beside you. Inside the day, practicality doesn't wait for a publication date. The song works if the feet arrive where water is, where shade is, where the good bugs are not. You circle back at dusk to a fire that has absolutely no idea how to act. Surprised, even though it's been waiting for your news. The silly stick does its proper lap. Reports are sung before they're spoken. You find yourself delivering your first verse without tripping sleeping dog, bend reed, comb, wasp resin, left the flood's salty tongue the bee tree, the long grass. Applause is a low hum and the gift of the eggshell moon in your hands. You pour 3 drops to the coals and 3 to your mouth, both for gratitude, none for show. As the drum settles into its patient heartbeat, you think about the last city you lived in, the way you surrendered maps to rectangles that never loved you back. Here the world lives in your mouth and feet. Memory is muscle. Direction is choreography. Safety is a chorus you can hum when you're alone and realize deliciously that you are not. The stars stitch themselves to your eyelids as you close them, and the path you learned today leans into tomorrow, ready to be walked, sung, and laughed into permanence. The day loosens into late light, and the camp decides that usefulness has done enough work for one sun. Someone flips the silly stick in a little arc, permission granted, and the circle slides from errands into ornament, from errands into music, from living into celebrating that living happened. You feel it first in the hands, a palm on a drum skin, a thumb on a string of beads, a child tugging your sleeve to help sort shell colors like you're arranging the sky. The drum warms its voice over the coals. It's a stretched skin drum, patient and low held between knees, tuned by tugging chords until it answers the fire with a sound like rain, remembering rhythm. A second drum joins, pitched higher. Then 2 hollow logs volunteer as cousins and get played with sticks until the whole ground agrees to be a resonator. Light joke 1, your foot starts tapping on its own files for emancipation and wins. A reed flute contributes 3 honest notes, your 3 honest notes. Then someone far more treacherously talented borrows it and braids a melody that makes your skin lift in pleased surprise. Mainstream anchor glides in on that tune in caves far away, and long ago, people carved flutes from bird bone and mammoth ivory finger holes, mouthpieces, the whole persuasive package so old that mammoths were still a rumor you could walk behind. The dating math lands somewhere beyond 30 millennia, a number big enough to make your lungs blink. Music is not an upgrade, it's a base install. Here, the bone whistle on the child's necklace and the drum by your knees are not novelties, they're inheritance. Adornment is the twin of sound tonight. Beads sprawl across a mat like a tame constellation. Ostrich eggshell, disc shell from far coasts that nobody in this valley could have reached in an afternoon. Red ochre powdered to a soft sunset and rubbed along cord, so it stains fingers the color of stories. You thread 2 pale discs, then 1 red, then 2 pale, learning the camp's easy counting song that keeps spacing true without rulers. Across the fire, a grandmother oils a scrap of leather until it shines, and then stitches a row of tooth charms across its edge with exaggerated slowness, so a ring of kids can learn the stitch by watching. The point is not owning, the point is making. The objects keep score of hours well spent. Quirky tidbit jingles from a pouch, a bull roar, a flat spindle of wood on a cord whirs when swung, singing a low eerie note that makes the dog sit up and the children widen their eyes. It's a prop for mystery. A distance voice that can announce a ceremony, or just announce that you've discovered a toy that scares geese. A cousin counters with a singing stone, a flattish rock balanced on 2 supports. When you tap its edge with another stone, it rings like a patient bell. Rock gongs, some call them elsewhere. Here, it's simply the stone that sings if you ask nicely. Light joke 2. Your app labels it xylophone probably. The stone demands a rebrand. Someone brings out figures from a wrap, small palm-sized carvings, round with soft edges, hips and bellies, giving the eye a generous place to rest. They pass from hand to hand with a hush that isn't quite solemn and isn't quite casual, like greetings for a cousin who's visited since forever. You know the academic nickname from far books, Venus figurines, but the camp has another word for them, the reminder. A grandmother plugs one into the curve of her own palm and laughs. See, you remember. Historians still argue whether such figures are fertility emblems, self-portraits shaped from the artist's own downward gaze, teaching tools about bodies and babies, winter pocket prayers, or something so ordinary we keep missing it. You feel the argument's size when the figurine's smoothness warms to your hand. It fits as though the idea it holds fits you back. Adornment stretches beyond objects into skin. A friend drags a thumb of ochre along your jawline and another across your shoulder, a diagonal blush, a soft badge. The smell is iron-rich, like rain that learned to be powder. A man beside you traces white clay dots along his forearms and then along a child's. Both glow when the fire leans their way. You remember your ash under the eyes bug armor from the first night, and grin protection meets theater, and both are welcome. The camp puts jokes into paint too. A teen insults the meat by painting a fishbone on his chest, and then demanding the smallest portion, a way to remind pride to sit down and share. Beauty has job descriptions here. Trade hums under the ornaments like a baseline. Those seashells. They didn't walk. Someone carried them from far-off coasts upon which you've only just started to set songs. Likewise, a dark glassy flake, obsidian, slices a reed with rude ease and tells a story about a mountain beyond tomorrow's horizon. Beads and tools ripple outward in networks, and with them travel visiting rights, news weddings, jokes. You are wearing a map that glows when it's hungry and hums when it's full. Facts keep a respectful seat by the fire. In burials where time piled slowly, archaeologists uncover cascades of beads that would have taken hundreds of hours to drill and string, labor saved up as love. In shelters where eating and singing traded shifts, they find paint kits of ochre grindstones, cups and bones scraped shiny by use. In wind-polished places, they note rock instruments pitted in ways that suggest drumming hands rather than weather alone. Yet every artifact argues softly, leaving room for the living voices around you. The camp does not need a footnote to remember the melody. By now, the drum has convinced even reluctant knees. People rise, collars, beaded hair strung with bright grass shells, at throats clicking with each laugh. The rhythm starts with a walk, then a shuffle, then a pattern your feet know faster than your ego. Someone calls your step by name Eggshell Moon, a callback to the time you invented a dance move by nearly tripping in the cave. The circle widens, contracts, spirals. Toddlers toddle into the middle and are applauded like headliners. An elder flashes footwork that makes the teenagers shut up and study. The dance isn't for performance. It's for plug-in, for suddenly feeling like the power is on in a room that was never off. Between songs, the joking dedications begin. A bead cord is lifted for the aunt with light hands. A stone pendant for a grandparent who just taught a knot you will never forget. A reed bracelet for the child who can now hum the water verse of the Path song without help. Gifts are not payments. They are plausible excuses to say you matter without making anyone blush. Light. Joke 3, you try to give your reed flute away as a sign of maturity. The circle votes that you keep practicing maturity for at least 3 more moons. Debate kindly keeps a toe in the circle. Historians still argue whether nights like this are mostly practical training, memory syncing, heartbeat smoothing quarrels, or mostly sacred talking with the quiet beyond the fire, and whether those round-bellied figures emphasize reproduction self-clothing, winter fat, or all of the above in ratios that changed with mood and moon. They also argue whether body painting is largely social ID team colors, or largely medicine, bug, and sun logic with art layered on top. You decide with the camp's cheerful permission not to decide. The song holds all the answers at once without shattering. By the last tune, your cheeks hurt, in the nice way from smiling, and your forearms wear a dusting of ochre that the river will edit tomorrow. The eggshell canteen makes its grateful lap. You pour 3 drops to the coals for whatever listens kindly, and 3 to your tongue for whatever inside you needs an amen. Your bead cord, red bell, red taps your collarbone like a metronome for calm. Music has done what it always promised to do, braided bodies into a single organism with many feet, turned strangers into chorus, made memory a habit you can dance. When you lie back, the beadwork crunches amiably, then settles. The drum's last heartbeat drifts into the river's continuous sentence, and a carved figure round friendly patient sits near the fire as if keeping watch. Happiness isn't an event tonight. It's an atmosphere tuned skins, powdered stone, borrowed shells, borrowed jokes, borrowed stars returned to you as belonging with interest. Morning wears its traveler's hat, and the camp looks larger than the bodies you can count. You feel it in the way people pack, not just tools, but stories, not just food, but obligations dressed as gifts. Today is a visiting day, which is to say, a day for widening the circle until the horizon admits it was never a wall. You tuck your bead cord inside your wrap, red, pale, pale red, because colors can be handshakes, and slip the eggshell canteen the pale moon into a net. News laughter and a modest bribe of dried fish ride along. Light joke 1, your inner customs officer asks if you have anything to declare. You declare vibes. The path toward the neighboring camp is already humming from yesterday's song. Wind writes its commentary in the grass. Your feet keep time. When the ridge flattens, you see smoke that does not belong to you. A good feeling if you carry the right introductions. A pair of hunters meet you halfway with the choreography of cautious welcome hands visible. Smiles first, then the ritual exchange of small troubles. You offer the universal tax gossip. 2 babies have acquired teeth. 1 elderly dog has acquired entitlement. The river has acquired opinions. You laugh together at the dog which clears the last inch of distance faster than any treaty. Mainstream anchor arrives wrapped in volcanic glass. One of the men carries an obsidian flake that bites sunlight and reed with equal appetite. It is not local. A mountain far from both camps lends this kind of black lightning. Geologists with clever eyes. Your future cousins trace such shards to their birthplaces, proving that stone traveled in nets of human connection, sometimes hand to hand, sometimes down the line from neighbor to neighbor, until sharpness circled half a landscape. In other places, seashells walked inland around necks and pigments bright as arguments, moved between caves like secret agents with stains. Trade is too stiff a word. Visiting rights, braided with gifts, is closer to the truth. The welcome looks like lunch. Your dried fish meets their roasted roots. Somebody insults the meat, the roots this time just to keep pride on its leash. Children swap toys without asking which is both precedent and prophecy. You notice a pendant on your host, a stone with drilled holes that hold bright threads in a pattern your camp doesn't use. He gestures and hums a short tune. The pendant is a name tag you can sing. Quirky tidbit that's also cleverly practical. Some groups carry message sticks or tokens carved with marks that help negotiated visits. Travel smoothly, I come with so-and-so's good word, and beads or threadwork can play the same role when everyone knows the code. Your bead pattern earns a grin. The elder across the fire hums your camp's water verse and adds a harmony you'll steal later. Beyond objects, there are people who move across maps like bridges. A young woman from your camp sits with a cousin here trading needlework and jokes without the friction of translation, because kin follows stories faster than blood. Marriage here is a glue stick for networks sticky without being stiff. Exogamy marrying out sprinkles, relations like seeds across ridges, so nobody is friendless when rivers misbehave. A man from this camp jokes that he now belongs to 2 fires and gets away with it because he brings a large basket of berries and a larger basket of reliability. Your inner spreadsheet, which previously fainted at demand sharing, revives long enough to admire this redundancy. 2 camps, 1 extended we. The market opens without anyone announcing it. A coil of cord trades for a cutting of a sweet-smelling herb that insects dislike and shy away from. 3 shell beads with a chip character swap for a flake of obsidian you will pretend not to love too obviously. Your camp's not for their stitch. Your honey guide story complete with the legal fees for their joke, about a heron who tries to sit on two rocks and falls between, which is apparently a metaphor for indecisive courtship. Light joke 2. You attempt to pay for the joke with a leaf. The comedian accepts, declares it legal tender, and immediately buys a berry. Facts sit down not as referees, but as friends who keep you honest. In Southern Africa, style and size, changes in ostrich eggshell beads show networks waxing and waning across late Stone Age miles patterns that look suspiciously like social weather reports, carved in tiny circles. In Ice Age Europe, stone and bone traveled farther than a day's walk, and camps that never met may still have shared fashions, ideas, and maybe even song fragments. The how remains an open box gebrechteberd, journeys trade fairs, where valleys narrowed and people piled up or slow each to the next handoffs. But the result is plain. Things moved because people moved feelings. Afternoon turns to tours. You walk the neighbor's camp like a museum that cares more about docents than exhibits. A woman demonstrates her fire carrier, a different fungus cradle than yours, with a trick to keep embers friendly overnight, and makes you practice the pinch and blow until you stop bullying the coal. A teenager shows you a throwing stick tune, a wrist flick that makes a stone vanish down a flight path your eye barely tracks. A grandmother splays open a stitch you thought you knew, and reveals the secret knot that turns bags into skins for carrying water. You pay for each lesson with awe attention and small edible bribes. Everybody wins. Debate is invited to the party. Historians still argue whether these networks ran dense as spider silk or sparse as constellations, whether trade in prehistory looked enough like markets to deserve the same noun, and whether long sea crossings began far earlier than anyone was comfortable admitting 50 years ago. Ancient DNA adds fuel in some places. It hints at exogamy patterns, women moving between groups more than men. In others, it whispers a different story. In still others, small samples make loud claims that tomorrow's bones may shush. The safe sentence is that people traveled farther and tied wider than our grandparents' textbooks, allowed sometimes across water that sneers at timid hearts. Evening rehearses the most serious kind of diplomacy play. Your camp's kids challenge theirs to no stepping on the shadow, which becomes a negotiation clinic disguised as chaos. Elders trade songs the way smiths trade sparks carefully, with respect for what belongs where. A new verse for the water chorus gets tried, voted on with a hum, then placed into the shared bank, where anyone who can hum it owns it. You offer up your eggshell moon dance step, and the neighbors refine it until it actually looks intentional. A bead cord changes wrists, then changes minds about who belongs to whom, which is a lovely lie because belonging here is bigger than wrists. A fringe glimmer peeks out of the joke bag. Visiting rights can include sleeping rights, and not just for married kin. Some nights, two teens from different camps swap spots under comparable stars, just to test how quiet they can be while being loud inside their heads. The elders tolerate it with a degree of oversight that would make any deity proud. The point isn't scandal, it's weaving. In the morning, chores are owed more than explanations. Courts elsewhere may blush. Here the law is, be kind and useful, which does the job. Before you leave, gifts go formal for 5 minutes, so the memory can carry them safely. Your host strings one obsidian flake on a short cord and ties it near your shoulder, a small visible loan of edge. You give a twist of fat wrapped in leaf, the flavor of last week's fish, the smell of next week's stew, and knot it with the stitch you learned an hour ago, proof that lessons traveled both directions. The eggshell canteen passes between hands, each palm adding warmth and a promise. If either camp's moon runs dry, the other will pour. Mainstream truth nods from the ridge when drought thins patience or flood fattens panic. It's the between that saves you between camps, between families, between mine and ours. Networks are happiness's bones, jokes its cartilage. Visiting rights, the synovial fluid that keeps movement painless. You feel taller walking home. not because you own more, but because more people can name your laugh. Night returns you to the familiar fire with unfamiliar adornments. The black bright shard, a new stitch in your bag, a tune that now belongs in your mouth. Your camp tests your news by the oldest peer review they try your tricks. The fungus cradle sighs and glows. The wrist flick launches an accusatory stone that terrifies only a beetle. The knot holds water like a new friend holding a secret. Laughter edits everything until it fits. Historians still argue about distances were people swapping shells across hundreds of miles in one traveler's lifetime or many. And densities where these webs always open or did war weather and rumor sometimes tear holes large enough to fall through the sky. Indifferent glittering offers perspective. Even a constellation is a fiction that keeps sailors safe. Your network doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be practiced. And you practice it by walking, giving, laughing, marrying out, and visiting back, by wearing other people's sharpness at your throat and letting your beads glow in someone else's dusk. You lie down with the obsidian cool against your chest and the bead cord tapping your collarbone like a quiet metronome. Tomorrow, a cousin will start a loop in the other direction, trading your stitch for their story, renewing the same web in a different color. The dog rolls over in size, a border around the camp that thinks in sleep. Light joke 3, your customs officer returns to ask if you're smuggling happiness. You declare it again and are waved through. The drum sighs, the river edits. Beyond the horizon, friends sit by their own fire and joke very specifically about your eggshell moon. You laugh in the dark, which is how a network proves it's working. By now, you carry 2 clocks, the one on your wrist that yelps about meetings, and the older one in your ribs that hums when wind shifts and porridge thickens. You walk the narrow bridge between camps, between centuries really, and you notice how calm. Here doesn't mean quiet. It means coordinated. The day fills not with pings, but with replies to birdsong, to shade to a cousin's joke, to the eggshell moon you pass like a soft oath. You remember how happiness came disguised as ordinary ash under your eyes that kept bugs polite, insulting the meat that kept pride on its leash. A honey guide with the negotiating skills of a small-winged attorney. Light joke 1, if your phone could live here, it would ask for fewer notifications and more berries. You test modern habits against this older choreography. Your inbox sorts nothing like demand sharing. Your calendar knows no song lines. Sleep under LED twilight doesn't learn the softness of segmented nights or the temperature's gentle cue. You're not here to scold your cities. Cities hold people you love, but you can borrow pieces of a camp that worked. Time wealth in small pockets walks that count as errands, chores braided with storycraft that forgives slowness and rewards taste. Rule without rulers where you can teasing as a de-icer for ego, stepping apart before sparks become flames, the silly stick in your kitchen drawer, ready to reset a bad conversation with a joke and a question. Mainstream anchors keep the fire honest. Skeletons from early farming villages show more enamel defects, more spinal wear, more dental caries than many foragers who came before bodies telling a story about long hours, narrower diets, and the cost of stored grain. Foragers weren't saints or superheroes. They were artists of enough. Their surplus when it arrived lived in friendships, not granaries. Their insurance policy walked on 2 legs and told jokes. Quirk arrives in your pocket like a mislaid mint, a lump of ancient birch tar chewed by a person who left tooth marks sharp enough to match. And when later minds tested the gum clues to their mouth's entire little ecosystem. Adhesive medicine pastime, DNA, time capsule, a fringe tidbit that feels like a wink from a cousin who forgot they'd left you a note. Light joke 2. You imagine a 10,000-year-old dentist saying, "Open wide fascinating." You reach for portable meanings the way your camp reached for portable homes. Ochre pouches become colored pencils on your desk. The bead cord becomes a gratitude chain that adds 1 disc for each ordinary kindness. The eggshell moon dance step turns into the micro-ritual you do before meetings, so you remember to be a person and not a spreadsheet. risk plans. Cache dinners in your freezer as calmly as roots in cool sand. Networks. Keep visiting rites alive with neighbors. Trade tools and skills the way camps traded obsidian and songs. Music. Beat a soft rhythm on the table while everyone tells one small true thing about their day. Debate keeps your humility awake. Historians still argue whether foragers were on average happier than us, or whether survivorship bias and romantic hindsight are flattering the past, whether violence was a rare storm or a weather pattern, whether demand sharing scales beyond small groups without new frictions. Anthropologists still argue whether songlines map with surveyor precision or with sacred elasticity, whether original affluence describes a general pattern or a set of lucky ecologies. Your answer tonight is practical, not final. The ingredients of well-being travel well, even when the whole recipe doesn't. You line them up time with edges worn round by company. Movement that carries stories as well as groceries. Food earned in steps and shared without drama. Sleep that listens to the dark. Rules that keep pride funny and kindness serious. Rituals that tune hearts to a common drum. Maps you can hum, networks you can walk. Plans that make worry bored. None of these require a cave or a mammoth. They require a circle. 10 people will do, sometimes thariri, and habits that forgive imperfection. Light? Joke 3 if perfection shows up, insult the meat until it relaxes. A final fact pads in and lies down by your feet. Humans are astonishingly good at turning places into homes and homes into schools for tenderness. You felt it when a camp you met yesterday made room for your mat. You feel it when the river edits its sentence and you edit your plans without sulking. Not every day is feast. Not every year is generous. Not every quarrel is easily teased into theater. But the spine of this life, the time, the sharing, the drift of song under work holds. You ease toward night, thinking about what you keep. The eggshell moon is already on its lap around the circle. You can almost taste the 3 drops for gratitude. The silly stick leans where you can reach it. The bead cord taps your collarbone like a metronome for gentleness. You will carry these home. They will ride in your pockets like tools and live in your rooms like drums. And on nights when the city forgets how to hush, you'll remember a map you can hum a sky, you can pour a joke, you can tell that shakes pride off its throne and invites your people back into a circle that can sleep. Let the day loosen its laces. Let the last bright thoughts take off their shoes at the door and tidy themselves into smaller kinder shapes. The fire you've been sitting beside shrinks to a velvet core and the river lowers its voice until it is only breath, and then quieter than breath, and then the hush that cradles breath. You stretch the way foxes stretch long and slow, and the ground remembers you the way it remembered you last night, and the night before, exactly where your shoulder prefers to settle, exactly where your knees ask for a little bend. The windbreak sighs its gentle yes. The beads at your collarbone make their tiny friendly click as you turn like distant pebbles settling when a tide draws back. Around you, the circle does what circles do. A cousin rustles and then stills. A dog huffs and then dreams. Somewhere a coal brightens under a careful breath and then returns to patient red. You are held in a net of staggered sleep, the oldest protection, the softest law. You give the night a small list to carry one thing you learned, one person you'll thank, one plan that can wait, and the night pockets them without argument. Your body is heavier now and safer for it. Eyelids drift, then lower, then forget they were ever doors. The smell of clean reeds and friendly smoke folds around you like a blanket that remembers your name. If thoughts knock you, offer them a little bench and tell them they can sit until morning. Most will wander off on their own. Breathe in like the river easing under stars. Breathe out like the drum remembering the slowest beat. The sky is still there, sown with small lights, and it will keep watch whether you see it or not. You are in the circle. You are on the earth. You are enough, and you are home. Sleep.